Hi, this is Alex from PHP Academy with a video tutorial on CSS padding and CSS margins. Now, in in a web document, I guess, as with anything, you want to keep things in as much control as possible. So you want to space things out nicely, and you want to have, maybe a container with some text in. But not want the text to sit right at the edges, right at the top and the left hand edge, or the right if your text aligning right. So what you want is you want to control the padding and the margins. So I've put these into one video because they're similarly relative to each other, and we're going to look at two examples. The first example we're going to look at is a container, and this container is going to hold some text, and we're going to change the padding of this container. But we're also going to take a look at what happens to the overall container and a bit about the box model and how this pushes out the width and the height of the container. And if we only want to say set the padding on the left, the right, the top, the bottom, etc. With regards to the margin, we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a header element, and we're going to increase the default margin on this. So two examples, relatively straightforward and straight down to the point. So let's first of all create our container that's going to hold our text. So I'm going to create a div, and I'm going to give this a class of, let's say text. Okay, so I'm going to say this is some text. Now in the browser at the moment, this isn't going to look, really like anything. It's just some text on a page. We're going to go ahead and we'll sort of start to style up this container. So for example, let's go ahead and, well, we need to first of all select the class, and then we're going to go ahead and we're not going to set we'll set a width actually. Yeah, we'll set a width and a height to this, but first we'll set a background color. So I'm going to say 000, just black, so we can see what we're doing a bit better. I'm going to set the color to white just here, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set the width to 200 pixel, and I'm going to set the height to 100 pixels. So let's go ahead over to our browser and refresh, and you see that we end up with this. Now remember, we've got a container which is 200 pixels by 100 pixels. Now the text at the moment sits right against the left and right against the top of this element. So what we want to do is we want to pad this element out a bit so it looks a bit nicer. Now, if we have anything else around this element, the padding is going to affect the width and the height, depending on where we specify the padding. So we might specify the padding to be an overall padding, or we might specify it just to be on the left, just to be on the right. But we'll look at the padding property and what we can pass to this anyway. Now, if I want to set the padding for the top, the left, the bottom, and the right, so all edges of this, or in other terms, north, east, south, and west, I would just say padding. So the property name is padding, 5 pixels. Okay, so that should be enough just to pull it away from the edge nicely. So what this will do is it will set padding to the left, the top, the right, and the bottom. Now, obviously this value can be increased, and that just increases the amount of pixels between the inner contents and the outer edge. However, we've got a problem. If we go ahead and inspect our element here, you can see that we've got a container with a width of 220 and a height of 120. Now that's because we have added an extra 10 pixels to the left and the right, which have 10 plus 10 is 20. That's added 20 onto 200, which is 220. And then we've got the top and the bottom. We've added 10 on at the top, 10 on at the bottom, and that means we've got another 20, so that's 120. So the only really way we can combat this is to go ahead and reduce the width and the height of the element. So we could take 20 away from this, which would be 180, and we can go ahead and take 20 away from that, which would be 80. So when we go ahead and refresh, we end up with an element still keeping its padding, so it's still got 10 pixels of padding, but we've now got an element which is 200 by 100 as we originally intended. Okay, so that's something you need to look out for when you're padding, and you don't push elements off the edge of your design or mess it up. And it's quite complicated to think about, but if you start with your overall container and pull it in, padding is actually quite a relatively straightforward thing. Bear in mind, if we were going to set borders now, we would increase the size, but blah blah blah. Yeah, this is a tutorial on padding and margins. Okay, so now that we've got the padding sorted, let's go ahead and take a look at how we can specify this and get a bit more control over the padding. Now, whenever I create some padding, I always do this, and the reason being is we've got a value here for the north, which is obviously the top, the east, which is obviously the right hand side of the box or the element, the south, which is obviously the bottom, and the west, which is obviously the left. So what we can now do is we can specify specific or different values for the top, bottom, left and right. So if I want, say, 10 pixels at the top but only 5 pixels on the left and right hand side, I would do that. And I might want none on the bottom. So when I now go ahead and refresh, you see that I've got the padding on the top that I placed here. So we've got 10 pixels north, 5 pixels and 5 pixels on the east and the west. So we've got 5 here and 5 here, and then we've got none on the bottom at all. So that's how we would go ahead and do that. Now if we wanted to be a bit more general, we don't want to be too specific, we can go ahead and we can set a slightly in between property. Now if I wanted the top and the bottom, so the north and the south, to be specific, I could set that. And we only need to provide 2 values. So this one is for the north and the south, this one is for the east and the west. So say I wanted 20 pixels top, 20 pixels bottom, and we'll make it 5 so we can see the difference. 5 pixels on the left and the right. I can specify like that. I can go ahead and refresh, and you see that we've got a large amount on the top and not as much on the sides. Let's just go ahead and inspect the element. You can see that we've got a sort of greeny area now on the outer edge, and you can see that we've got the 20 on the top and the 20 on the bottom. Sorry, the 10 on the top, the 10 on the bottom, which has made another 20, and then we've got 5 on either side, which has made an extra 10. Now the original width of our container was 180, it's now 190 because we've got 5 either side, and the original size of our height was 100, and that's now 120. Oh, sorry, it was 80, so we've now added 40 onto there. So we've got a container with an extra 40 pixels padding. So again, you would need to adjust the height and the width of your container if you were going to be including this sort of, specific padding. Anyway, what we can also do is we can use the standard properties, and we could say padding top. So we might want to just say padding top 10 pixels. We might not want to just say padding 0, 0, 0, 0, and then we might not want to just do that because that's a waste of characters here. So what it would be more efficient to do is just say padding top 10 pixels. If you knew you weren't going to add the extra padding on at any time in the future, you could just leave it like that, and then we just have the padding on the top. So if we inspect it again, you can see we've got a width of 90, which is how we originally intended it, and we've now got a height of a width of 180, and we've now got a height of 90, which is 10 pixels more than 80. Okay, so by now I've sort of over-explained that. It should be relatively simple, but if not, play around, inspect that element, and you'll be able to see the way it pulls it down and makes it bigger and stuff. Okay, so now that we've looked at padding, let's go ahead and get rid of that, and we'll go ahead and look at margins. Now, best way to explain this is with perhaps a header. We might want a header to our document and then a paragraph of text. So let's go ahead and create the markup first. So I'm going to create a header here, and I'm going to say page title, and underneath this I'm going to create a paragraph of text, and I'm just going to say page paragraph. Now by default, our browser will render us some styles on this, and the useful thing about using our inspection or our element inspector is we can actually see the default styles. Now you can already see that we've got a massive padding on the top and the bottom of this header, and the same with the paragraph as well. You can see the yellow area is actually the margin. I think I just said padding, but I meant margin. So we've got a massive margin on here, and we've got a massive margin on here. And we can actually see this if we click on H1. You can see we've got a margin set here, blah blah blah. So what we actually want to do is we want to go ahead and change this. We want to override the default style sheet. So I'm going to be keeping the paragraph the same. I want the margin on the top and I want the margin on the bottom, but I want to change this header, because what I don't want is this massive margin at the top pulling my header down, because it doesn't really look right. And if this was inside a container, we'd have a massive gap at the top. So, that's not something I want. So inside primary.css, I'm going to target my h1 elements. So any h1 element, could be an h2, could be an h3, an h4, an h5, but in this example I'm going to do h1. So I'm going to target my h1 with a selector, h1, and I'm going to say margin. Now bear in mind that we've just looked at padding, and margin is exactly the same. So we could do that. We could say margin 0 at the top. We could say 10 pixels margin on the left and the right, and then we could say 50 on the bottom. We can do that. But in this case, I just want to modify the margin, the top of the margin. So let's go ahead and say margin top 0. Okay. Now we don't need to include px. That's a waste of space, because we're not specifying a specific value to this. So I'm not saying 1, 2, or 0.5. We don't actually need to give it a measurement, because 0 is nothing. It doesn't need a measurement. It's nothing. So we can just put 0 in there, and that saves us a couple of characters as well. So when I refresh, you see that that's come up. Let's go ahead and inspect it, and you can now see that we've just got that nice padding on the bottom, which we need. Again, we could go ahead and modify that by using the longhand property margin bottom, or we could use the shorthand property. We could say margin, north, east, south, and west, or whatever. Okay, so we've modified the margin. Now, how does this differ to padding? Well, padding is in the inside of an element. So, we could go ahead and we could specify a padding to our header as well. We could do the same thing. We could say padding, 10 pixels on all edges, and that will just sort of pad that out as well. And Chrome element inspector shows us that nicely. It's showing us the margin at the bottom in sort of that yellowy orange color, and it's showing us the padding in green there, and then the actual element in blue. Obviously, it's not going to be advisable to set the padding in this margin. You might need to do it at some point, but in this case, they're two entirely different things, and that's sort of what I'm trying to explain. So the margin is on the outside of the element. It doesn't affect the size of the element like padding does. So margin, if you think of margin from the very outer thing you can do to a container. So if I was to go ahead and say set a border on the bottom of this, say border bottom 1px solid and black, and I go ahead and refresh. What this doesn't do is it doesn't affect anything, so that it's outside of the box model itself. So we've got the padding on the outside that comes after the border, so the margin's outside of any properties we can give to the element. So padding affects the inner, margin just pushes anything away from the element on the outside. That's probably the easiest way I can explain it. So we've looked at the shorthand way of doing things, which is probably usually what you'd use if you're being precise. The overall way to do it, so something like padding 10px would set padding or margin on all sides. And we've also looked at a bit about the box model, how the padding and stuff pushes things out, and how the margin can be quite useful for overriding defaults like the header, which contains a massive margin on the top by default. So that's a CSS tutorial on margins and padding.